Welcome to By Faith with Susie and Mike. This program is about regular people who've activated their faith and have done great things for the kingdom of God. When we move, God moves with us. What is God calling you to do today? By faith, obey His voice and enjoy the ride as He does things you could never imagine. Now here's your hosts, Susie and Mike.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the premiere of By Faith with Mike and Susie. This is our podcast, and Susie, this is our first show. Before we even get into it, where do we come up with the name By Faith? Tell us about that.
It's in the Bible.
Right, Hebrews 11.
Hebrews 11. And so because my life, after tragedy, the Lord have ingrained in my heart from my mom that we need to always have faith in Christ. And so I'll tell you more about that later on.
Well, we're excited that you're with us, and every single 2 weeks we're going to have a different guest on, and we're going to talk about people like you who have activated their own faith in their life. So let's tell your story as we start, because it's really amazing. Your obedience and your faith have put you in a position where God has used you in a pretty miraculous way. And I want to go back. I want to start from when you were a child. Can we go back to your mom's kitchen in the Philippines and tell us what you saw there?
Well, my mom used to feed the homeless in our kitchen when I was a little girl. And I really did not like that because the homeless ate my food, occupied my space. So I grew up not liking any homeless people.
So your mom, we call her a Proverbs 31 mom. Why do you call her that?
Well, because if you read Proverbs 31, I mean, it depicts my mother. She was very smart, intelligent. Number one, she loves the Lord. She got the fear of the Lord. She was beautiful inside and out. And the number one thing that probably I got is her legacy of being generous and kind to the poor and the homeless and the poor ministers. She would kind of almost adopt them. So she would feed the homeless in our city, and then she would give them jobs, chopping woods in our home. And then if there's a minister that would come, she would give them money and then feed them and allow them to stay in our home.
So one time, a homeless person actually slapped you, correct?
Yes. And the same woman that my mom fed. So I really got mad. I said, I don't like any homeless people. So that really became worse when she slapped me. I was just 10 years old in the marketplace without provocation. She just saw me, and I think I looked familiar to her because she was mentally ill. She just came and then slapped me. So I grew up not liking any homeless people.
So that's amazing, because the reason that we're going to be talking about your story is that God eventually, later in life, calls you to actually go out and reach the homeless. And you now are known for having the largest birthday party in the whole nation at the Dallas Convention Center, which is incredible. So we're going to hear about how God took you there. But let's go back to when you moved to the United States and you met your husband. His name is David, and he is a big part of the story. Tell us a little bit about David's character, his heart, and more importantly, how did you guys first meet?
I met him at First Baptist Dallas on evening service. Actually, he was my classmate in Sunday school, but I really did not meet until I was 4 months old from the Philippines when Baylor Hospital hired me as a nurse, came over here, and went to church immediately on the first Sunday. And 3 months later, I met David when we sat next to each other at the evening service.
And I heard that David sort of saw you singing the hymns, but you were not looking down and reading them. What did you memorize them?
Yes, because it was exactly the same Broadman hymnal that we use in the Philippines in our church. So when the pastor, the music director would lead us into singing, I would just burst into singing, "How great thou art, it is well with my soul." And I memorized it because that was exactly the same songs that we were singing in the Philippines.
Neat. And David was a real gentleman, right? He asked permission from your roommate to take you out on a date. He wanted to ask your parents. Tell us about, even on your first date, when you were cold, he took off his jacket. This is all in the book, No, Not Me. And we encourage you to see our website. We can get you a copy. But anyhow, the first time that you were with David, you were cold, and he took off his jacket, and what did he do?
Yes, he put it on my shoulder, and that was our first date. He was such a gentleman, and he would sit me in the chair. He would open doors for me, and he told me one time I was getting out of the car real quickly, and he said, "Oh, Susie, will you please allow me? Because my mother and my dad taught me that if I am with a lady, I need to treat her like a queen." So he would open doors for me and really treated me like a queen.
And David always had a heart for the underdog. And David really had a heart for those who had a mental illness or a challenge.
Yes.
You saw that when you guys were on a date at a diner. This story is in No Not Me. It really touched my heart, and it tells you a lot about David's heart. What happened at that diner?
Well, the manager was not very pleasant to this mentally ill person that was waiting for his hamburger, and that really upset David. So David confronted the manager, and you could see he was so passionate of helping the underdogs and the poor, the mentally ill, the homeless. That was the heart of David, and exactly that was the heart of my mom.
And David, even when he eventually proposed to you, he got permission right from your mom and dad. I was laughing when I read this part in the book, especially your dad, right? He gave him a hard time.
Yeah, well, David said that if he would marry me, he could only marry me if my mom and dad would say yes. We were of age. I was 25, he was 31. And I said, oh, sure, we will call mom, because I was raised in a very conservative home, Christian home. So he asked permission from my mom and my dad really did not say a lot. He just asked David, okay, so what's your plan? And then David said, I wanted to marry Susie if I could ask her hands. And then my dad said, oh, okay. But it was a different story with my mom.
Yeah. When did you discover somewhere along the way that David was struggling with a mental illness? When did you sense that depression and anxiety, was it early on?
Yes, 3 years after we were married, David, we went home to the Philippines because my father got severely ill from a stroke. So David and I went to the Philippines. So for 5 days, David went there and read scriptures to my father. And my dad was in coma, and he was, he could not, we thought he could not hear anything. But anyway, so David would read Psalms and Bible promises to my dad, and then later on, dad died, and also my uncle died, and that's when we discovered that David, it started the symptoms, like he was not sleeping, he had diarrhea 20 times a day, not sleeping, and he was anxious. And so anyway, make long story short, he was diagnosed with a chemical imbalance called serotonin deficiency that caused severe depression. And that was the beginning 3 years after we were married.
Wow. So when he would struggle with depression or when he would have serious bouts, how was your faith challenged during those seasons?
Oh, I had no other place to go but God. So I would cling to God's promises, and I would claim it, and I was like holding on to God, and every word of the Bible would come to life because I had no place to go but Jesus. And the Lord carried me. And of course, we took David to the best psychiatrist in Dallas and psychotherapist and best medication. So it helped for about 6 years.
So let's get to the most challenging season of your life, when David he was struggling with the depression, and he went missing for a long period of time. What happened?
Well, one day he disappeared, but before that, there was something that happened through our mortgage company that it was changed, so it made him so upset because he was already becoming paranoid. That was because of his mental illness. And so he told me on the same day, he said, I'm going out of town where nobody knows me, and I'm going to start life again. And then he left that day. For 30 days, he was missing. And on that time of 30 days, I would open the Bible, and God would take me to Psalms. So I would just hold on to the promises of the Lord. And the verse that God gave me was Psalms 30, verse 5, that said, weeping may endure for a night, joy comes in the morning. And I didn't have any support because people did not know that David was severely depressed, because we did not tell the people, because David was afraid that they will reject him.
That's really a common thing for people who are struggling with depression, right? They want to keep it quiet. That must have been tough for you because you probably would have liked to have a lot of prayer warriors pray for him. But that's a normal thing when people are struggling with that.
Yes. Yeah, it was hard because I am a very transparent person. I like to share to people that they could pray for me, but no, I had to obey what David wanted. So if it's going back, if it happened, if I could do it again, I probably would become more transparent so people could support me.
So your mom ends up moving from the Philippines and comes back to the United States, lives with you, right?
Yes.
In Dallas. That's amazing that your mom was with you as you were battling with this real problem with David. Tell us about how comforting it was to have your mom in the house with you when you were going through this struggle.
Well, actually, when David disappeared, my mom arrived in California 2 weeks prior to David's disappearance, because the Lord know exactly. He knows that David would be missing, so he took my mom out of the Philippines through a neighbor. So the neighbor accompanied mom to California, and mom stayed in California with her cousin, and that's when David disappeared. My mom was already in America, in California, coming to Dallas. And then I called mom a day, no, my mother called me a day after David disappeared, and she asked me if I'm okay, because she said a day before, on the day of David's disappearance, something happened to my own mother. She said her bones became like wax, and she didn't have the strength to even stand up. That was because I was in agony when David disappeared that day. There was no support except my mother and father-in-law. My coworkers did not know that my husband was missing. And my mom said, oh, now I understand that I felt so weak yesterday. So I believe that the Lord will speak to the mother, even though they're so far away, if their child is in trouble or in. And that's when the heart of God is saying in Psalms 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. So I was clinging to the Lord, and my mom was she was a rock for me being there. And so I thank God for that.
Didn't you and your mom together kneel next to each other? Read this in the book, and you guys would pray when David was missing?
Yes, every day, because I work 3 to 11 shift as a supervisor at Baylor Hospital. So when I go home at night, 11:30, at 12 midnight, me and Mama will kneel down every day, and then we pray. And that was the legacy that Mom have taught me, because that's what she had been doing even when we were little children in the Philippines. My mother would pray by name for all 9 children. I'm one of 9 children.
That's really amazing. So basically, you got somebody knocked on your door, and unfortunately, it was a police officer, right? And this is when David was missing. Tell us about what happened.
Well, 30 days later, a detective from my place knocked and said they found a car of David, and it was in Atoka, Oklahoma, and we are in Mesquite, Texas. And he said they found a car. And so we went there the next day. We went to Atoka to locate David, because the car was there, but there was no David. And on that same day, we did find David. And it was the sheriff who found him. He was hiding in the ravine, and nobody could really find him because he was in a ravine. But we found him from the other. We were on the other side, and when the police was running at 12 noon, there was a gunshot fired on the air, and so I knew that was the signal. We were trying to locate David, and then I told my pastor, I said, oh, that is a signal. He said, what signal? We did not plan on any signal. I said, I know that. That is a signal. He said, okay, let's go there. So while we were going there, we saw the sheriff running from the top of the hill screaming. He said, I found him, I found him. I said, I found him, I think it's his body, I think it's him. And I felt that the whole world, like the sky, came down and became black. And I felt the burden. That was real hard, but the Lord sustained me. So anyway, then we buried him a day before Easter. And he was supposed to sing in our church on Easter Sunday. The title of his song was Heaven. And the pastor said, no, he's singing his song with the Lord, because David accepted Jesus when he was a little boy. So I believe with all my heart that it was the mental illness that killed him, and not David. If he was on his right mind, it was the lies of Satan that killed him. But now he is in the presence of the Lord.
So I was thinking about when you found David in the field. Basically, what you were thinking then is you said, "Oh, David," right? And you actually fell to the ground. But when I was reading your book, when you actually said God, something different happened. You didn't fall down. You got a supernatural lift. Tell us about what actually happened.
Well, when we found David, he was about 100 feet from me. I could not get to him because there was a little creek, a body of water. So I immediately just turned around and I fell to the ground. I was mad. I was mad at David. My emotion was very, very angry towards David, but not with God. So I just screamed. I said, "Why?" I fell to the ground. I said, "Why, David, why?" And then after that, I stood up, and then I went to the top of the hill because I wanted God to hear my cry. And then I screamed at the top of my voice, and I said, "Lord, give me strength." So I was raising my hand and I was screaming twice, "Lord, give me strength." Immediately, I felt electric voltage in my toes going, running like a snake, like going up here, like a voltage came out of my mouth. And I believe that was all my anger, anxiety, all those negative emotions that I have in my heart for a long time, because I was crying to the Lord for strength. And then immediately there was an immense peace that came to my heart. And then when I started walking, I felt like two arms lifted me. So I was lifted about 1 foot above ground. So I walked like I was in the clouds, like walking. And there was so much peace because God heard my cry.
Wow. So even when you got back in the car and you were in the back seat of the cop car driving back to Mesquite, the hymns that you memorized many, many years earlier, you were actually singing them.
Yes,
correct?
yes. Because they found the car of David in Atoka, so my pastor drove the car back home, and another pastor was in the front seat with him, and they told me to be at the back, lie down. So I was lying down, and then I started singing the hymns that I first sang when I met David for the first time. The same songs, and the title of the songs were "How Great Thou Art." I was singing, "Oh Lord my God." I just keep singing. And then I sang, "It is well with my soul, when peace like a river attendeth my way." And it gave me peace, because those were the songs that me and David were singing on our first meeting.
I find that to be fascinating, because God knew one day that those hymns and those words were going to bring you peace. And here you were singing them, which is incredible. So tell us what happened. Obviously, you went through a tough season, but then you woke up and chose joy and asked God. You said, "God, what can I do for you?" And this is where the title of your book comes in, where it says, "No, not me." But tell us what happens next.
Well, after we buried David, 3 months later, I was in a car accident. So I became disabled, so I could not walk for 2 months. So 2 months later, when I started walking, my next door neighbor shot his heart 30 feet from me while I was baking a cake. And I got mad at God. That's when I got mad at God. Because remember, I was mad at David in the beginning, but not God. This time, I was mad at God. I questioned him, why? That same night, this was September 1993. David died March 9. We discovered him April. I had a car accident in July. And then this was September. And then I said, "God, why?" That same night, God gave me a dream. In my dream, I was knocking at my neighbor's doors, telling them about Jesus. The next day I woke up, I said, "I'm going to choose joy," because the Bible said, "Weeping may endure for a night." Remember on 30 days that David was missing? That was the verse that carried me. And the Lord reminded me of that verse. So I said, "Okay, God, I'm not going to be mad at God anymore. I'm going to choose joy." So I said, "Lord, what can I do for you?" When I woke up the next morning, well, I tell you, do not ask God, what can you do for him? If you're not prepared because he's going to take you out of your comfort zone. Because that exactly 3 weeks later, he took me under the bridge in downtown Dallas. I was driving. Then I heard a voice in my spirit saying, look at your left side. So I looked. Then I saw 100 men and women, cardboard boxes as their homes. And the voice said, you go there in person. That was the Lord speaking to me. I said, no, not me. Those are crazy lunatic. And I saw them in the Philippines, and they followed me in America. I said, nope, I'm not going. And the voice said, you were the one who asked me, what can you do for me? Right there and then, I got convicted. I said, God, forgive me. I would go. What could I take to these needy people? And the Lord said, blankets. So that's how this blanket ministry.
So you eventually became known in Dallas as the Blanket Lady. You were still working as a nurse full-time at Baylor, and you and your mom, which is fascinating to me because that's where the ministry began in the Philippines, would go and buy blankets, right, for $5. And when you would open up your garage in Mesquite, the blankets would fall out because you had so many blankets in there. But tell us about those early days of ministry when you and your mom would go out and just hand out blankets to the homeless.
Well, every Saturday, because the Lord said blankets, so every Saturday we'll go out and buy blankets, and I would spend my own money, and then people started, doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists started giving me $5 for a blanket because I asked them, I begged them, please give me $5 so I could buy blankets, and it's going to be a Thanksgiving next month. So that's how really it started. I became the blanket lady. I would put blankets in the trunk of my car for 8 years. That's me and my mom. That was the ministry of mother and myself, blanket ministry.
So this eventually became a nonprofit ministry, Operation Care International. And then in 2004, which is an incredible thing, God really stretched your faith. And this show is about activating your faith. We call it By Faith. And your faith needed to be activated when God said he wanted you to actually go and rent the Dallas Convention Center. This is an amazing story. And have the largest party for the homeless and impoverished. Tell me how this began, because it's so incredible.
Well, the plan was that we will have this birthday party for Jesus, and not just blankets anymore. It's beyond that. He gave to my heart and also to the heart of Ron Batts, who was also chairman of the board of Operation Care. So we have the same vision to hold a big birthday party where the guests are the homeless and the poor. And it will be at Dallas Convention Center. So I heard a voice on June 2004. And the party is going to be December 2004. And the Lord said, you're going to have this party at the Convention Center, and this is what you need to do. You call Dallas Theological Seminary, DBU, and Southwestern and ask for volunteers for evangelism. Number 2, call Baylor Hospital in Parkland and ask for medical volunteers. And then he said, call First Baptist and also Potter's House and Prestonwood for volunteers that would help make this party happen. So I called everyone. Everybody said yes, except for one. Preston Wood said, no. I said, could you send us your choir, because they are known for this massive choir? They said, no, we're busy on December, so we could not do it. So that was June. And in October, God put in my heart to call Preston Wood again, so I did. I said, hey, the Lord said you're going to be in our party for the homeless and sing. They said, no. I said, so what's the solution? They said, oh, why don't you call the youth choir? So that was, I called the youth choir. Make long story short, the youth choir was looking for a ministry for the homeless to sing on the same date, December 18, 2004. So when I called, the lady answered the phone. She was screaming at the top of her voice. She said, oh my gosh, it's the same date of what we wanted to do. And nobody could accept us because there's 300 youth choir and it's too big for a homeless shelter. So I said, how about Convention Center?
That's amazing. So this event eventually becomes the largest birthday party in the nation, and you had 10,000 people show up year one.
Yes.
Year one, and you didn't start till when, October?
Yes, we started meeting October 2004, and the event was December.
Okay, and there's a miracle. Actually, let me see that book for a minute. Hold that book up. This is 31 days of mountaintop miracles. I want to talk to you about what I think is one of the more amazing miracles. You still needed over $100,000. You had buses bringing people from Fort Worth to the Dallas Convention Center. You didn't know how you were going to pay for them. You had all of this stuff. Tell us about the miracle, about how God provided in year one, 2004, how God used Diane Etheridge and Dottie Thompson to perform really one of the greatest miracles in that book.
Well, we didn't have any money. We have only $20 given by a little boy who took his money from his piggy bank and gave all to his mother. And this boy is from Cleveland, Ohio, who heard about our event in Dallas from Ron Batts, who was chairman of the board. So he gave everything he had. That was the only money we have 30 days before the event. So I prayed that morning. I said, God, Lord Jesus, it's going to be 30 days from now. It's going to be your birthday for Jesus. We don't have any money. We only have $20 in the bank. So I said, your name is at stake. So I told God, your name is in trouble. Then I went to work. That same night, Diane, in charge of fundraising, called me. She said, Susie, I went to my friend this morning, Dottie Thompson, and I asked if she could give us some money because we don't have any money. We'll have this party for the homeless. And then she asked me, how much will it take for you to have this party? And then I told her $100,000 so we could buy shoes and food and clothing, coats, and rent for a convention center. And Dottie Thompson said, that's truly amazing. I'm going to give you $100,000.
Wow.
I wanted to give this money 2 weeks ago, but I ended up in the hospital for surgery. And she said, I never was able to give it to another ministry. And that was exactly the amount. So I believed it is from God. So I'm going to give it to you.
So God has been stretching your faith and doing miraculous things. We are, as we head into 2020, and we're going to talk about One Day 2020, which is December 19th, 2020, where, first off, tell us about how God gave you the vision of One Day 2020. We have about 5 more minutes, and we're going to unpack more of your story in part 2, but tell us about One Day 2020.
Well, so now we have this event every year at the convention center. This is our 17th year now. So the Lord have expanded the vision. It started in 2012 when I was in Indonesia, in the prayer mountain in Indonesia, and the Lord said, you're going to come back on this prayer mountain. So I started going to prayer mountain every January 1 to 7. I would pray and fast, and I will ask God for direction. And while in Indonesia Prayer Mountain in 2013, January 1 to 7, I fasted and prayed. God said, you will have this event of birthday party for Jesus in 50 states. And then the next year he said, it's going to be around the world. The next year he said, you're going to have an evangelistic celebration in the evening with Franklin Graham leading it. The next year he said, you're going to minister to children internationally, ages 7 to 12. The next year he said, you're going to have 2 things, evangelism and foot washing. And then the next year he said, you're going to pay the international $10,000 per country. And something amazing happened on that vision.
Yeah, so you have had one miracle after another, but you were thinking in your own mind, Susie, that maybe you could do 20 countries, right?
Yes.
But of course, God is always thinking much bigger than us because he has limitless resources when we think about what we can do. So tell us what happened with that phone call where God provided.
Well, I came back to Dallas on 2018, January, and then the Lord spoke to my heart. On February 1st, I was in the office, and then a volunteer was sitting next to me, and the Lord said, call your friend, Ben. So I called Ben. I said, hi, Ben. He didn't answer, so I put the phone back. And then 5 minutes later, the Lord said, pick up your phone, because it was not ringing. So I picked up, and Ben was on the line, and I said, hi, Ben. And he said, hi, Susie. He said, I'm sorry, my plane just landed when you called me, so how is 2020? I said, oh, I just arrived from the Philippines, and the Lord spoke, and he said, we're going to do a birthday party for Jesus in different parts of the world, and we will give away $10,000 for shoes towards the children that will need shoes, because 2 things, evangelism and foot washing. And I said, we're going to do 20 because in honor of 2020. And he said, Susie, it's not 20. There's 240 countries according to CIA. So he said, I would like you to meet my board members on Monday. Do not tell them about the money. Don't ask for money. And I will take care of 240 countries for you, which is 10,000. That means that's $2.4 million. That's in a matter of 3 minutes phone call, because I listened. I heard the Lord speaking to me, and I obeyed, and I called in the phone. So it was a 3-minute phone call worth $2.4 million.
So basically, God provided in a couple of minutes internationally. And I'm excited to tell you that we already have over 100 countries on board for One Day 2020. It's incredible. And there are some countries we can't even mention because it's just incredible. And we have so many partners in the U.S. We've got a church in Brooklyn, the Christian Cultural Center. We went to New York, and God supernaturally opened the door there. That's a 40,000 member church. They're going to be a part of it. We're going to be in Atlanta. We're going to be in New Orleans. We're going to be all over the place. Tell us, December 19th, 2020, we like to say it's just the beginning. What do you mean by that?
It's just the beginning, because every December, third Saturday of December, we're going to have a birthday party for Jesus in America and around the world. So hopefully in 3 years, 240 countries will do it.
Well, Susie, we have so much more to talk about, so we're going to have you back for another 30 minutes, but I hope you enjoyed this. You know, Susie's faith and obedience, it's really contagious, and you do see miracles follow her around, but it's just because she listens and then she obeys. And this can be anybody. We like to say on our show that you could activate your faith and you could see God do miraculous things. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time on By Faith with Susie and Mike.